now numbering 11 entries, the latest of which, Out of Sight, came out just over a couple of weeks ago. And tonight I am joined by Neil Lancaster, also published by HQ Digital. Neil, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you write.
Well, hello everyone. As Paul says, I'm Neil Lancaster. I'm the author of one 3-book series, the Tom Novak series of thrillers. I'm also beginning now with a new series that starts on the 16th of July in ebook and audio, which is the Max Craigie series, which is a Scottish crime thriller. Although you never quite know, because I never quite know what I'm going to write until I've finished the book. I live in the Highlands of Scotland. I'm an ex-Metropolitan Police Detective Sergeant, and I was also in the military police for 6 years. So I write books that are influenced by what I've done in the past, but mostly I just make it up as I go along.
That sounds great. Yeah, and we're definitely going to have to talk about some of this interesting backstory you've got. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I am a recovering school teacher and science. Was a researcher before I went into this. My book, Out of Sight, is the 7th full length in the series. There's 11 in total, and basically involves my usual protagonist, DCI Warren Jones, and his team in Middlesbury, North Hertfordshire. Don't bother trying to look up at the map; it doesn't exist. And basically, the book opens. We've got the body of a naked man in a ditch. His teeth have been smashed in with a hammer. He's had his fingerprints removed. So, first order of business, of course, is to try and figure out who on earth he is. Once you've done that, they have to try and work out where, when, and why he was killed. And the mystery from there then is that he appeared to have led a secretive double life, which included meeting men online. So the question is, was he killed by his estranged family, or was it by someone he met online? So, Neil, what's the premise to your latest then? I've read it already, by the way, guys. It's a cracker.
Thank you. That's very kind. Well, it was all actually inspired by a story I got told by an old guy, an old ex-cop who was in the west coast of Scotland back in the 1960s. And he was telling me about a story from back then when he was researching his wife's family history. And he went to this little old graveyard literally in the middle of nowhere in Caithness. And he said, I just found a grave that just said on it, this grave can never be opened. It actually said this grave never to be opened, which is obviously slightly grammatically questionable, but we suspect it was probably in the early 1800s, maybe even earlier than that. And more likely it's something to do with cholera or plague or something similar to that. But it sparked something in me. So I wanted to write something inspired by that. Now, I'm not a historical fiction writer. Who wants to write about a pandemic? Well, I don't want to read about one, so I certainly don't want to write about one, not at the moment. So I thought, how can I bring this into a contemporary thriller? So I came up with the idea that what about if a feud that started in 1830 came into the present day? And the book opens up with a chap called Tam Hardy, who's the biggest gangster in Scotland, an elderly dying man who's retracing his family steps. Now, he is murdered in that graveyard, and his body is hidden within that grave. Now, my protagonist, DS Max Craigie, and his sidekick, DC Janie Calder, are called in to investigate what is at first a disappearance, but they quickly find him. It then becomes clear that the rest of the Hardy clan, his 3 sons, are hell-bent on revenge, and not just revenge on the man who killed them, but on every other member of his family. And Max and Janie, it's their job to stop it. And that is the premise of what the book is going to be called, which is Dead Man's Grave.
And it's an absolute cracker. It's out next month. I was lucky enough to read it a month or so ago, and it was absolutely fantastic. Now, what Neil is far too modest to mention, but which I am going to mention for him, is it has been longlisted for a rather prestigious prize. So come on then, Neil, play your trumpet.
Well, I've been living in Scotland for 6 years now. My 3 previous books, whereas they've had a fair bit of Scottish action in them, and my protagonist was raised in Scotland, even though he's actually Bosnian by birth, I wouldn't have classified them as Scottish books. This book was a Scottish book to its very, very core. And I've been living in Scotland 6 years now. And I pointed out this to my editor, and he said, well, that makes you eligible for the McIlvany Prize, which is the prize that they award out of bloody Scotland, the big festival in Stirling that's in September every year. So he said, I'm going to enter you for it. And I thought, well, I'm an Englishman. Well, I don't know. You look at all the other people who've won this in the past and you think, well, yeah, no chance. But then I got a phone call a couple of weeks ago from Bob McDevitt, who's the director, and said, no, you've made the long list. And I said, well, who else is on the long list? And he then gives me this list of names that are the royalty of Scottish fiction. So I'm up against Val McDermid, Chris Brookmyre, Stuart McBride, and many, 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 Denise Minor, so many others. So I don't hold up a huge amount of chance, but I'm delighted to have a long listing. It's really nice.
Well, it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome company to be in. And like I said, I thought the book was absolutely superb. Really, really enjoyed it. And it's the first in the series, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I've almost finished the second draft of the third book. So the second one's in. That's going through the second round of edits now with with HQ. That will be coming out in the early part of next year, and then the third one will be out in the summer of next year.
Oh, terrific! So quite quick then. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was obvious it was going to be a series because the way you built up the supporting characters, leaving aside Max. We've got Jane Calder. We've got his wonderfully foul-mouthed boss, Ross Fraser. Those characters. I mean, be honest, are they actually based on anyone you know? I mean, you have to name names because that would be rude. But have you took elements?
I mean, Janie, no. Janie's really she's sort of evolved. I had her as a sidekick, a fairly green sidekick, accelerated promotion, all that sort of thing. But during the editing process, my editor was really said that she could be really good. You need to develop her a bit more. So I sort of made her a little bit more awkward, a little bit more quirky, I think is the correct word to use. But Ross is a complete product of my own imagination. Even though there are characters out there, as you say, he's like disgustingly foul-mouthed. He's always suffering from gout. He's always angry. He hates the whole world. But sitting at the core of him is a very, very good man and a very astute and smart police officer. So yeah, he has been such fun. I love him so much. He's such fun to write about.
It's really good fun to read.
Yeah, because, and you know what? There are some of my old supervisors and DIs from the past. If they read him, they might think, is that even influenced by me a little bit?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you meet a lot of characters in 25 years in the Met, and it's impossible for elements of some of them not to creep into the characters you create.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you say, hybrid. You take bits here and bits there, but enormous fun to write. Yeah,
it's really interesting actually because you mentioned these 25 years in the Met Police, because we both write police procedurals. I'm just a science teacher, just making it up as it goes along and using Wikipedia and Google. But of course, you lived it. But I think what's really interesting is that before you had your lengthy stint in the Met, you were actually military police. And I am fascinated. I mean, what is what was the differences between them? Was it a challenge moving from one to the other? Was there a lot in common, or was it just a completely new ball game for you?
It was totally different. It was totally different. I was in the RAF police. I served in Germany, Cyprus, Falkland Islands. I got about a fair old bit. And really, the big part of your job was security. I was a dog handler for the majority of it. There was an element of being part of the service police and part of the military police in terms of discipline, enforcing crime, enforcing military law and just general law. So yeah, I mean, the training had a fairly big input and a fairly big chunk of law thrown at you. But really, I felt like I was a security guard the majority of the time. And the RAF is a pretty law-abiding place. I mean, even you'd have like your average military cop who would go around wearing the uniform, all that sort of thing. And they, again, nearly all security, but with base patrols, discipline patrols. When everyone got drunk, you'd be expected to calm that down and sort it out. But really, not a lot of arresting went on. It was a quite peaceable place. So yeah, very different. I mean, so even though I had a decent enough grounding in the basic law, when I went to the Met, it made it a little bit easier. And I guess the thing is, used to talking to people, used to the occasional confrontational situation, but the jobs were so incredibly different. The Met, obviously, and working in the civvy police really bore very little resemblance. It's not like being Jack Reacher, and where Jack was dealing with everything and everything. So yeah, me and Jack Reacher, both military police, but that's where the comparison ends, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've read some of your earlier books, your Tom Novak series, and obviously he's a police officer, but they're a lot more thriller-like in the sense that he's, a bit more running around with guns and that sort of thing. Whereas Max Craig is more of a sort of traditional police procedural. And you would think, well, ex-Met police officer, so he must know all the procedure and stuff. You then decided to make life more difficult for yourself and shifted everything to Scotland, which for those of our viewers who are not unaware, has a completely different legal system to England and Wales. So how was that for a learning curve? And, well, I suppose, why did you do that? Why did you not stay on Save Clown that you know so well?
Well, it's because this is where I live now. This is now home. I've been here a long time, and I love the place dearly. So I just had this urge to write about it and to base the books here. It wasn't that difficult. Because, I mean, yeah, the rules are different. The rules of arrest and detention are different. Obviously, the court system is significantly different. There's no CPS. You've got the procurator fiscal. There's different terminology. Like, police officers in England and Wales, if you've got like evidence that you seize in the course of an inquiry, you refer to it as a criminal exhibit. Up here, they'll refer to it as a production. So it's little things like that you need to get right. Then there's no coroner up here. It's all done by the procurator fiscal. So it's about getting these little things right. The main procedures, and because I worked with cops from Scotland when I was in the Met, we did a few joint inquiries, and one was a fairly notable inquiry around the World's End murders, which is a fairly famous murder. That was all down to I'll briefly touch on that. That was down to a familial. They knew that there was another outstanding suspect, or they strongly suspected. A joint inquiry team between what was then Strathclyde and Lothian and Borders, and they really strongly suspected there was an outstanding suspect. So they did a big cold case review, and they managed to find a suspicion that there was a familial DNA link to a suspect living in London. So they tasked us with doing some surveillance on him, which we did. It was actually one of the hardest surveillance operations I've ever done, because the guy was an absolute alcoholic. Honestly, he got up in the morning and he was shit-faced. It's literally straight away. And so the Scottish police said, look, can you follow him and try and get a covert DNA sample from him? Because we want to match that to the outstanding partial DNA we've got to see if there's a possibility that there's a match. You'll know all about this with your science background, about the science around partial matches, whole matches, familial matches.
So anyway,
absolutely. So we follow him round, and it's, normally surveying, you've got a big team and you're all buzzing around, and it's a real, quite a skilled job to do. Here, you've got a bloke who can't walk in a straight line, constantly falling over walls and everything. And so we think, great, well, he's going to be smoking. So off he would smoke, but he would smoke with all the other vagrants in the middle of Acton. And they would share their cigarettes. And we thought, well, we don't need that. So I had to, in the end, we're following him for 3 or 4 days, and there's no way we were going to get a clean cigarette. So even me, as a non-smoker, he'd left all his drunk mates to stagger up the hill home. So I go and buy a packet of cigarettes as a non-smoker, and I stop him and say, you got a light, pal? And he goes, aye, and so I light a cigarette, give him one, and he goes, do you want one? Yeah, great. And off go. And then my mate sticks to him like glue and follows him home, where he ditches it. And then we've got it. So we phone up the incident room in in Glasgow, and they said, please, can you get it up here tomorrow? And so they put us on a plane, and we went up and delivered it to him. And as it was, this bloke ended up not being a suspect, but being a significant witness. And we discovered that the actual outstanding suspect was dead. So the end result was good, but was justice served? I don't know. But it was an interesting inquiry. I went way off the point there, didn't I? As I always do.
Well, no, but it's a fascinating case for those who aren't familiar with it. Two young women, only teens, going out on was it New Year's Eve or was it just
it was something like that, 1970 something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they went out, and the World's End pub was the last place they were seen, wasn't it? And they never came home, and they were found, and they'd been raped and murdered. I'm quite interested in the case because I was fortunate enough to go to a talk with the detective who finally was in charge when it was wrapped up, and he'd been on the case for years, and he became close friends of the family and everything. And I was fascinated to hear that there was a semen stain on one of the girls' dresses, and the forensic scientist in charge basically said, I am holding on to that because one day they will be able to do something with it. I mean, this is back in the 70s, and he just kept on rolling it out the freezer every time there was new evidence. And I believe he sort of shakily took to the stand in his 80s to actually give his evidence. And this was the case that triggered the end of double jeopardy in Scotland, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, because they got the evidence together for him and were able to lock him up on the base because he'd been acquitted of it, and then they changed the rule on double jeopardy, which of course now
inexplicably acquitted as well, from what I understand. Everyone walked out and said, "What the hell? What was wrong? What was the jury on today?"
Well, of course, in Scotland you've got the not proven aspect as well, haven't you?
Yes, of course.
Which I do talk about in my third book. No one's going to see that for a year, but it's actually referred to as a bastard verdict. Which it's referred to. I think it was Sir Thomas Henry Moore or something like that.
Yeah.
He used to be the sheriff of wherever, and he really would refer to it as a bastard verdict. That I thought was a nice little touch, because as a crime writer yourself, Paul, you'd hear that and you'd go, "Oh, I've got to find room for that." Because this is the sort of thing, it's like when back in Scotland many years ago, when they'd sentenced someone to death, they wouldn't sentence them to death; they would pronounce them for doom. You've got to get that in a book, haven't you? You've got to find room for that.
Absolutely, yeah. You hear these little things and you see these little things. You think, that's tucked away. That's on the notepad for later. But
I don't know if you're the same as me though, Paul, because I can then change the whole angle of a book to use that little nugget. And it can change the whole direction of a book for me, because I think, I really want to get that. How can I get that in? And
it's going in that book, whether it kills me or not. Yeah,
it's going in. If I have to change the story, it's going in. Like with my first Novak book, I can't remember what I was researching, but then my son was talking to me. He'd been in Iraq a fair bit because he's the Royal Marine, and he was saying, I heard some things about SRR, Special Reconnaissance Regiment. And that some of these special forces, they use these like laser listeners where they bounce a laser onto a window. Comes back into an audio thing, and it will take the vibrations on the window and translate that into speech. And I thought, oh man, I've got to find room for that. And then I found that you could do a DIY one. So I was about using like laser pointers and all this sort of thing. So I, again, changed the whole course of a book because I was determined to have this little nugget in there. Which didn't really add anything to the story, but I was just determined that it was really cool. So I'd use it.
Yeah, I've not changed the entire story round, but I have been determined to write a story about something. I mean, I guess the best example was the previous book, last year's book, A Price to Pay. One of the central themes of it was a guy who was murdered in a massage parlor. And that all came about because my missus had paid for us before Christmas a few years back to go for a massage. And I'd never had one before. And after we had the massage, and we're lying there, just, they give you 15 minutes at the end with the nice candles and the music and stuff in the dark. And I just thought to myself, if someone walked through that door with a knife, I could never defend myself. And I thought, and that one sat in the back of the brain for ages. And
I must throw that away.
Yeah, exactly. I killed a bloke in a massage parlor. That's the thing. Is you put those little nuggets that go in there. But you must have loads, because I mean, I really wanted to talk about some of these cases because you've got, frankly, a far more interesting back history than mine. I mean, I've used my experiences, don't get me wrong, because my protagonist's wife is a school teacher. So, I could use bits of that, but there's limited options. I mean, she's helped out in a few cases because she's known about how diabetes worked. That was useful for Silence of the Grave. And once or twice he's asked her for advice. But, you've got some absolutely fascinating stuff. And I know this because when I was doing a bit of research on you, I kept on thinking, I know that face. I've seen it. And we've realized that we've seen you popping up on TV a few times to give you your learned opinion. And there's a couple of cases which you've been involved in which are absolutely fascinating. One which I think is fairly well known, and the other one perhaps less so. There's Levi Belfield, who was the killer of Millie Dowler. You had some input into that case. And then another one about a guy called Nazakat Ali, is really dodgy immigration solicitor. Are you prepared to talk about those at all? Because they are, I think people would love hearing about that.
I mean, look, it's Levi Belfield has been endlessly spoken about. I can honestly say he's the worst person I've ever encountered, and I only really encountered him from a distance because I was on a surveillance unit. I mean, the murders of Marshall McDonnell and Millie Dowler. Sorry, Marshall McDonnell and Amélie Delagrange. They were both killed around the area, not far around the sort of Twickenham, that bit of southwest London, moving into Surrey area, and they linked them through a number of disparate methods to being Levi Belfield. Now, I wasn't on the inquiry team. That was led by Colin Sutton. Now, obviously, he was played by Martin Clunes in the outstanding dramatisation of it. Really sensitively done, really smartly done. And they got to a stage where they thought, well, we need to plan an arrest strategy for Levi Belfield. So they called us in. I was on what was known as the Homicide Task Force, which was part of the Homicide Command, and we would be used to give proactive, intrusive surveillance type support to murder inquiries. And so they deployed us on Levi Belfield. They said, you've got to follow him, you've got to stay with him. And I think it was for 10 days. And that was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we split our teams, we called in extra things, and we were with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we did that for 10 days. And we followed him all the way around West London into Middlesex, and he was out wheel clamping all the time. He had his own, he just had some wheel clamps.
He just gets worse, doesn't he?
Yeah. Oh, he was horrible. He just brimmed with arrogance. And there was many occasions when you're thinking, are we going to have to take him out because he's up to such badness? Are we going to have to take him out on the street? One particular incident which was really disturbing, which I will tell you about, is he was out on the street in Middlesex area. He was driving his clamping van and he pulled over at a bus stop, and there were two young girls there in school uniform. They would have been 13, 14, I guess. And so we put the word in. He stopped. He's talking to these two girls, and into the control. The instructions came back in. Don't let them get in the car. They can't get in the car. Take him out if it has to. And it was too early. It was too early. The evidence wasn't there really, but you can't risk it. You couldn't let the girls get in the car because what would have happened? You can't. It could have been a murder on your watch. So we were closing right in, and then there was an interaction between them, and he just swears at them and calls them slags or something, words to that effect. And then they storm off, and he gets in his van and drives away, and we leave him run. We don't interfere. But the backup team get hold of these two girls and get them in and say, well, what happened? And they said he was just being really rude to us and really horrible. And then he said to us, apologies if anyone's disturbed. He said, I bet you're both really tight. And that was, and he dripped arrogance. He is the archetypal example of a sociopath, of a psychopath, grandiosity, narcissism. He just ticked every single box. And so we held him and we were with him for the whole 10 days. And then we got the instruction from Colin Sutton that we're going in tomorrow, put him to bed, stay with him all night. We're going in first thing in the morning. And okay. So freezing cold night, I remember that. So we plot up all around his house in cars, and some poor sod in the back of a van, freezing cold, watching his front door to make sure he doesn't come out. Stay there all night. And it's really hard, you've not had any sleep, and your eyes on. You can't afford to drift off. You can't afford to lose your concentration, because the consequences of him getting away are just too horrible to think about. But no, we were confident. And so early in the morning, the team go through the door. And none of this is news, because this has all been on the TV shows. So, I'm not talking out of turn. We then withdraw back to West Drayton police station, close to his place. And we're just waiting to hear what's happening before we're released, because we haven't been to bed for 24 hours. And we then get the call. He's not here. You've missed him. We're all, oh man, I didn't fall asleep. I didn't.
There's a cake penalty there. There's one.
There's a massive cake penalty. Well, no, because the chief super was apparent. I wasn't there, but I heard, and I spoke, because I know Colin Sutton, who was the SIO in the case. Great guy, great investigator, best I ever worked for. And he says that Andy Murphy was the DCS. His words were, "When I find out who's let him go, they'll be on traffic duty tomorrow morning." So, but anyway, we then get the call from one of the guys on the team, said, "We found him. He was hiding in the loft." So it all ended okay, and he never got out again, and he'll never get out again. He'll die.
No, is your whole life tariff?
His whole life tariff,
yeah, rightly so. Yeah.
So that was the most notable case I worked on. I did work on as you mentioned, Nazakat Alley. There was a program that was on Panorama. Now just to preface that, we'd been investigating Nazakat Alley because we'd heard that his firm, Ali Sinclair Solicitors, I was working seconded to the Home Office, Immigration Enforcement at the time, and we'd heard that there were too many questionable applications going through his firm for sham marriages, what we thought were sham marriages. So we were starting to investigate it all, putting it all together, and the numbers were eye-watering. His firm alone had processed, I think it was 1,600 marriage applications between Europeans, as we were back then, EU citizens, to marry non-EU citizens, which were predominantly Pakistani, Indian, Sri Lankan, all of whom don't have an automatic right to be in the UK, as it was back then. So we were on the case, we're putting it all together. We then get a phone call from the BBC. We're doing an expose on Ali Sinclair Solicitors. It'll be out tonight. So we watch it, and an undercover journalist goes in pretending to be somebody whose nephew is in need of a sham marriage, and he makes him an offer. And we went in the next day and arrested him on the basis of what was on Panorama.
Just let me interrupt. Could you have really put your foot down if Panorama, then you said, look, seriously, you're going to absolutely screw our case? There is nothing you could do to ask them to.
No. You can ask them nicely, but they'd already done the work, Yeah,
there's no sort of injunction you can get taken out, stop even broadcast.
You'd have to, it was fair journalistic comment is the reality of this. And as it went, it gave us the most amazing evidence, because we had all this evidence of him clearly being corrupt. And the jury, they hated him from the first minute of the trial. They loathed him because, we just played all the unedited footage, and we just let it run. We let the footage run and let him do what he was doing. And he was clearly corrupt. You can watch it on YouTube. If you put in "My Big Fat Fake Wedding" into YouTube, you can see it. So, but what then followed, because this was so enormously complex, the amount of money involved was colossal. It was a huge inquiry to put together. And there was me and another guy who put this whole thing together. And it ended up as an 8-week trial in a London Crown Court. He was found guilty almost immediately. And his Proceeds of Crime Act sum was £2 million. So it was a great job. But it also gave me the inspiration to write my first novel. Yeah. Because he was co-conspiring with a Czech gang who were bringing girls over from the Czech Republic. But now, you go to the Czech Republic and you go to Prague, and it's fantastic, it's lovely. but there are enormous parts of the Czech Republic that aren't so nice, and they are really quite poor. And these girls were horribly, horribly vulnerable, and they were trafficked over to the UK to be prostituted out, but B, as an extra, they'd put them through sham marriages because there was very, very big amounts of money. You're talking £8,000 to £10,000 it would cost the groom to secure his wife to be. So yeah, I mean, a horrible man. He was a horrible man as well. And but he got 6 years in jail and we emptied his pockets. So yeah, it went really well.
Was that, yeah? Didn't he ever? He did have a crack at carrying on, didn't he? Because I'm sure when I was reading about him, he shouldn't have been practicing, and then he was carried on practicing and stuff.
He was struck off by the SRA, Solicitors Regulatory Authority, struck him off. So I don't know what he's doing now. He's out, so he'll be doing something. But yeah, a really interesting case. But
arrogance again, isn't it? Like Belfield, he said that arrogance, but it's kind of, it's almost nice to what trips them up. Really arrogant, and then there's a point at which that trips them up, and there is something, I suppose, quite gratifying about those sorts of things.
Hugely. I mean, it was hugely stressful because he spent a serious amount of money on his defence. He employed a QC and a junior, hundreds of thousands of pounds of legal fees to try and get himself off. If he'd have been sensible enough to just plead, he probably would have got 2 years and could have saved himself a lot of money. But he never thought. Yeah, again, absolute arrogance. But again, great material because of the characters I met and dealt with. It gave me a real interest. All the in Eastern European criminals, because it's massive. Albanians are really running cocaine distribution at the high level now. Because they're horribly violent, they're horribly ruthless, and so all of this is amazing stuff to salt away, to be able to call on when you're thinking of what am I going to write next? What can I, what themes can I write about next?
Well, this is what I was going to ask, actually, if you've got a list of themes. I know I have a sort of list of things I want to talk about, and I sort of working my way down the list. And in fact, A Price to Pay, the last book, actually did look at this idea of people trafficking to a degree, or more less the people trafficking side, more the modern slavery side, with the farm workers and the people working in the nail parlors and all that sort of stuff. And I did sort of get in a dig because London Weekend Television was doing a big series on modern slavery in London a couple of years back. And so I did put a little dig in about, the hand wash car washes, where you do the sums. You've got 3 or 4 people to send on your car for 20 minutes and you hand them a tenner. And it's like, okay, do the sums on that and tell me how that's minimum wage. So
money laundering as well. It's a perfect front for money laundering.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
because
that's the primary source.
How much is the tax man going to be troubled with all of this? And,
absolutely.
Nail bars, mobile hairdressing, all that sort of thing, all these cash businesses. It's going to get harder and harder to launder money because who uses cash anymore? I mean, my wallet is always empty.
My wallet's full for the simple reason that I got given some cash just before lockdown after we cancelled a party, and they gave us the deposit back. And 15 months later, I'm still spending it. Just literally my local chip shop. That's all we pretty much use. We've only been there about 5 times. So it is interesting stuff. There is many things, to talk about. There's things and it can be themes and sub-themes. I really wanted to talk in one of my books about disaster capitalism, all around Brexit and things like that, because it just struck me. It was the whole thing around Nigel Farage, about how he, on the eve of the Brexit vote, he conceded on the basis of a really bad poll. But it turns out he probably knew about a far more accurate poll that showed Brexit would succeed. But he conceded. And on the basis of that concession, that happened to the markets. Now, of course, if you can put your money in the correct places at the correct time, you can make serious money doing this. So this thing of disaster capitalism really fascinated me, and it really still does. That
you see the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and people like this.
Exactly.
And I think, are these people are they engineering it? This is, this self-flagellation of the country to make to make themselves rich. And that really fascinated me. So I've spoken about that in a couple of books, just because it, stirring up race wars, because it would, cause it destabilize, wipe money off companies and share prices.
Yeah, I mean, the race war thing is fascinating. I mean, I looked into that bit for the common enemy. It's basically a far right activist is murdered in an alley, while there's a march against the so-called super mosque, which of course is crap. I mean, no such thing. It's just a slightly larger mosque because the local Islamic centre is too small, but they're having this march. And it was just fascinating to look at some of the organisation, like Britain First is the classic example. They're experts at doing these seemingly innocuous Facebook memes. Isn't it disgraceful that all these squaddies are homeless? Click if you agree. Oh yeah, click. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no problem at all. And what they're doing is they're basically building a list of people who might be interested in slightly more extreme stuff, and then they just ramp it up. And eventually they've identified people who are more likely to share their views, and it's so cleverly done. I mean, the foot soldiers are just chimpanzees. I mean, they really are. But a bit further up, you've got the really intelligent ones who really know how social media works. Britain First are just a classic. They're experts. And
you can see that moving now into the anti-lockdown movement.
Yeah,
they were what most of them are what I would call they're just cat-see football hooligans who found another outlet. And and they are they're just malleable to this Facebook, where you can manipulate Facebook to serve up adverts, all this sort of thing, for things that a lot of independent authors have become really expert at. In order to get people to buy the books, you can do that to serve up unsavory content, and it spans all the way across the political spectrum.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I mean, there are other things I like talking about. I like the fact that you can have people who can manipulate the population by not by forcing them to do stuff, but by making them sort of believe it. And I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about.
And the echo chamber is just on social media. It's incredible. I listened to a documentary about the echo chamber on YouTube, and that YouTube, basically it's like Amazon algorithms. If you liked watching this video, you like watching this. Well, how are you supposed to get balance if YouTube automatically, once you've watched a video with one viewpoint, does nothing but serve you videos with the same viewpoint? There is no balance on YouTube because it's not giving you that choice. And we have to be ever so careful. When in school when we used to search for videos on YouTube to show to the class, that I put in I'd have a video on evolution, and of course you'd have the recommended videos on the right hand side. And it took the words evolution, etc., and said, "All right, they're really going to be really interested in all this stuff about creationism." And I'm like, "No, science teacher, really not interested in creationism. I don't want my pupils watching it." So we have to be really careful because of that sort of echo chamber. But yeah, I think there's some really good stories I think coming up that are really going to pick that apart. And the racism thing I think is really interesting because until Black Lives Matter kicked off in the last year or so and with George Floyd, in which case it became more acceptable for these guys to start being racist against black people again. They've gone kind of quiet on that a bit, and basically have gone towards Islamophobia because that became a very easy target. You just have to show a few jihadis and Death to the West, and you can build up your audience on Islamophobia. Don't tell jokes about black people because it's in most people flinch. Oh, God, good God, those jokes went out of fashion 30 years ago, mate. Well, I suspect that we're going to get the swinging back now after the Black Lives Matter, and you've got All Lives Matter coming in now, which is a thinly veiled one if ever there was. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting, and that amplified with that echo chamber. I mean, could you imagine what Bernard Manning would have been like if he had Facebook?
No,
It would have been horrendous.
does it? Doesn't bear thinking about.
No,
But it gives us things to talk about in books. It gives us other. Yeah, I mean, I had fun with the follow up to Dead Man's Grave. It's a post Brexit thing, and I was reading that they were really worried about the Scottish coastline, the sea lochs, as a route for smuggling drugs, because they think that obviously with Brexit comes extra checks at ports, which makes life more risky if you're a major drug smuggler. Now, there's 11,000 miles of unpoliced Scottish coastline. There's only one customs cutter in this part, so you're not going to get caught. No. You just, you can have a decent, reasonable pleasure yacht. You can easily bring drugs in. And I thought, that's something to play with. I really like that. So that was the theme for my next book that's coming up.
I mean, I think yours are a little more contemporary in the sense that they're much closer to your publication date as to when your events are set. Mine are running a few years behind. I think Out of Sight, I'm going to embarrass myself here, I think 2016-17, I think is roughly when that was set. And that means that I've got a grace period of a few years. So Brexit vote has happened, but Brexit itself hasn't happened. And I've got 2 or 3 years before I need to start thinking about the damn great elephant in the room of COVID, which is quite useful. Yeah.
I've got a plan for that. I'm just not going to talk. I've got a plan for that. I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm just going to pretend it happened.
I'm probably, because it'd be another couple of books at least until I need to hit that point, because the book 8 comes out next summer, and that is in 2018. So book 9, which I'm going to start this week, is going to be, going in maybe into 2019. So I've got another couple of years yet, and I'm thinking by that point I might struggle a bit with the whole kind of, seriously, he sent this book in 2020 and he hasn't mentioned COVID. So, but
I don't particularly date my books. Though I never really, I don't attribute any specific date to the books.
See, I have. I don't put the year, but you can work it out. That's the problem.
I guess, but I just don't want to write about it. It depresses me too much. I don't want to write it.
I'm going to go light touch, I think. So I think it's going to be just before. So there'll be a book set in the very early part of 2020 with some foreshadowing. I know from my own experience that all my colleagues in the science department of school, by February we knew which way it was going. It was very obvious, and I think with Warren's wife being a science teacher, her school was the same. So she's probably going to be nagging him to get hold of some hand sanitizer and to be careful. So I think a little bit of foreshadowing there, and then the next one hopefully is probably going to be set in this summer when things have eased a bit, and I think it'll be more like it'll be then more a case of getting out the car, remembering to grab his mask and his hand sanitizer, and Liz Mystery. I've just read her. It was last 7th Gus McGuire one, and that's got some of that in, because it is that sort of gentle kind of, you're in a pandemic. It mentions social distancing at work, how they have to consider it in the interview process, and I think that's going to be really interesting. But I won't need to write that. I won't be writing that for 18 months. So 24 hours in police custody will probably have already, those episodes will show the police in PPE and stuff by that point, so I can at least write authentically. But, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think a lot of people are going to shy from it. A lot of people are going to say embrace it fully, and others are just going to fudge it.
Yeah, and I think whatever works. I think I've not read any pandemic thrillers, any pandemic-based books yet. But I'm just going to leave it. I think I'll just leave it and then hope that people just read and enjoy the book for what it is.
Leslie Loy's just said in the comments that apparently Karen Slaughter tackles COVID in False Witness. So, I think Karen Slaughter is absolutely brilliant. So that'll be really interesting. Yeah,
but she's Karen Slaughter, so she can. People are going to read her books, come what may.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone at another one of these events, and I said that when everything's calmed down a bit, and the big international authors are traveling around again, I am so desperate to see Karen Slaughter meet her properly at a festival, because I knew nothing about her. I didn't even know what her voice was like. And then she did an event with Mark Billingham in London a couple of years ago, and they've known each other for 20 years. And it was an absolute hoot. I mean, she just looked an absolute scream. So she's on my kind of wish list of people to go and see again, because she's good to watch, but also hopefully bump shoulders with at some point at Harrogate or somewhere, because she does look like a good laugh. Who's your dream? Who would you really like to meet at a festival? And I mean, as in have a beer with in the tent afterwards.
Greg Hurwitz.
Yeah.
I just love the Orphan X series. They're one of the ones that books that made me think maybe I should have a go at this. I would have said Ian Rankin, but I live quite close to where Ian Rankin's got a place, so I do occasionally have a beer with Ian. So
he's a really nice guy, Ian. Actually,
he's the daddy. He's the daddy of this of the genre I'm now writing in, and he's been really kind to me. And he read my book and said some really nice things about it.
Yeah.
So it's great to have a beer with Ian.
If he's the daddy, then the mummy's Val McDermott.
Yeah, well, I'm on the long list with her. That's really
yeah. Have you ever met Val?
No, I haven't.
You've not? Oh, right. No, she's fantastic.
I've seen her speak at Bloody Scotland a couple of years ago. She was doing an event with Denise Minor. They're really funny, really.
Yeah, it would be.
Really funny people. But I mean, I really would. And I wish I could just. I'd like to meet some dead authors, because I'm a big fan of the 1970s genre of action thrillers. My all-time writing hero is Desmond Bagley.
Right.
Who wrote, to me, the greatest ever thrillers. Now, people will say, no, that's Alistair MacLean. And I love Alistair MacLean, but Desmond Bagley is the one that...
He's the one who does it for you.
What planted the seed in me was Running Blind, which is a lapsed spy-type thriller, all set in Iceland. All in 1970s, and it just did everything for me, that book, and the influence in my own writing is phenomenal. So I mean, if I could bring Desmond Bagley up, I'd really like to meet him. Greg Hurwitz, I absolutely love the Orphan X series. It's great. It's great to be in and amongst it, and sort of getting to meet other authors and people. I mean, the books. What are you reading at the moment?
Oh, I am literally just about to start Will Dean's third Tuva Moody.
Right.
Yeah.
I just read recently his Last Thing to Burn standalone.
I've got it on the Kindle. Yes, that will come soon after this.
That's a hard read. I mean, it's brilliant. It's the protagonist is brutal in it, but it's a superb book. I'm reading Imran Mahmood's I Know What I Saw. And
that's the new one, isn't it?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I've just bought the first one. I thought I'd read that first.
And they're standalone, totally different subject matter. But they, I mean, I'm reading it now. It is absolutely outstanding. I really recommend anyone to read it. His writing is earth-shatteringly good. Quite literary, but not at expense of a gripping thriller.
No.
And that is hard to do.
Absolutely. And I think, that's getting onto one of Val McDermott's favourite topics, isn't it? This whole idea about that there has to be some sort of silo between literary and crime and genre fiction. And of course, there doesn't at all. And, a good writer is a good writer. It just depends what they're actually doing it in. And if you're a genre writer, not only are you've got to have the skills to write really, really well, and as well as any literary writer, you've also got to have a plot. Which it can be an optional extra for some books. I mean, what is I think unrecognized and unappreciated a little bit is sometimes when they say, "Oh, it was a page turner," that can sometimes be sort of put in as a bit of a slight on the book. What?
I'm thinking, I want my books to be page turners. I want them to be, there are certain books you can luxuriate in the quality of the writing. I'm doing that with Imran's book. I'm reading it more steadily than I would normally read. I'm no less gripped, but it's not like I want to race to the end. Other books, Steve Kavanagh's books, I just have to read. I can't. I literally have to get to the next page. And that takes an enormous amount of skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes
Yeah,
a huge amount of skill.
And it's a skill to do it without it becoming parody. I mean, I don't like to speak ill of other authors, but I mean, there is the joke about Dan Brown having a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter to get you to turn the page. And I think the criticism is not so much that; it's more that they can be a little overt, shall we say, a bit hit you with a hammer. But I got some edits back early on in the process for, I think it was Out of Sight, maybe A Price to Pay, one of them. And my editor said, "Oh, look, you've got some chapter endings here, but you do need a little bit of a cliffhanger." And I thought, yeah, you're absolutely right here, actually, because in fact, that end of a chapter, in many ways, people would thank me because that was the perfect time to say, right, okay, I tell you what, I'll put the book down for the night and I can start reading it again tomorrow. But actually, of course, you don't really want that. And you don't have to have much. I didn't, have anybody shot or anything like that. Who was it who said that when he's not quite sure what to do, he just shoots someone? I can't remember. It was one of the greats. Anyway, I didn't have to do that, but it was just enough to just leave a small revelation. So it might be just that little thing that tips you over the edge. Should I put? Oh no, I'll do another chapter because I want to know what happened here. Yeah, that is a skill, and I had to think about what happened in that chapter that I could rearrange to put that at the end of the chapter. Because that's another thing that crime writers do, which I think doesn't always get the credit sometimes it deserves, is the timing. Because you've got to time your reveals correctly. Because when you compare to what happens in a real life investigation, where things can often happen simultaneously, or there can be a very long pause before anything happens, or the evidence doesn't necessarily come in a logical order because you piece it together at the end, but wouldn't work in a book. And you've got to try and make it sound plausible, and you've got to get the order correct. I think sometimes, there deserves to be a bit more credit, I think, for that skill.
There is. I've got to say, writing a page turner, it's not easy.
No.
Reading a page turner can be easy, but I don't think writing it's easy. There's a skill in making someone want to turn the next page. And that isn't in necessarily the words you write. It's in the construct of the whole book. And I'm not sure whether that comes naturally or it's something you plan and plot. I mean, I don't really plan and plot.
No, I'm not a big plotter.
I roughly do. I might have an idea. I've got a whiteboard. I've got some Post-it notes, but I don't meticulously plot. I read about Claire McIntosh, who's got her new book is out today. She meticulously plots. Laura Shepherd Robinson, who are wonderful historical thrillers, she will write for months.
Yeah.
Or plan for months without getting. I mean, when she's got it, she might have a 20,000, 30,000 word synopsis that she then turns into the book.
Wow.
But it's it's different. We all work differently. And I thought I was wrong when I thought I didn't plot anything. I thought that can't be right. But then I heard Ian Rankin talking about it, and he said, if I knew who had done it 60% of the way through the book, I wouldn't want to finish the book.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if it's all right for him, probably I can just carry on.
Yeah, but I mean, I tend to know. I mean, I know who's done it. I mean, I must admit, I've never written a book where I don't know who's done it. Which I know some people, obviously, like Ian Rankin, for example, and Lee Child, a few others, often don't even know the protagonist, the killer. But yes, definitely minimal plotting before I start. Mine tends to be a loose collection of ideas of things I want to see and a theme. I mean, Sam Brownlee asked a question a moment ago, saying, do all your books start from a spark of an idea and grow, or do you plan before you start? Is it that, because we've talked a little bit about ideas, you just take an idea and just go from there, or
I will just have an idea. The book I'm just about to finish the second draft of. I'll be sending it to my agent fairly soon. Started with a basic hook that it would appear someone connected to the police is killing people who get acquitted. That's where it started. I had an idea in my head as to who the bad guy was. I used the word guy advisedly. I got to a certain point and I thought, what if it wasn't him?
Nice.
And I thought, and it just came to me. And then I don't know much about the craft of writing, as in the mechanics and the craft that people teach. I don't really know much about that. I spoke to someone and they said, well, what do you think? What are you going to do? I thought, well, I might kill him. And they said, well, where are you in the book? I said, right, I know, 45, 50,000 words. And we said, well, that's your midpoint twist. Go for it.
Yeah.
and then see what happens. And I thought, okay, I didn't even know a midpoint twist was a thing, really. So I just
So, but growing on from that, do you write largely in order then?
Completely in order, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, no, totally in order. I won't. I can't bounce about. My brain doesn't work in that fashion. I
Yeah,
have to
I'm
make
the
sense.
opposite.
I have to make
I
sense of
don't.
what I've written and be sure that the plot is tight before I know. I mean, I have a thing on my board. I'll write up chapter numbers and I'll say what are my next 10 chapters, and I'll scroll some bits across. But then when I get there, I'll look and I've gone way past them, and I haven't followed it in the slightest. It's completely different because it just follows on to me as a natural consequence. And I think, well, that's happened, so maybe this could happen. Or suddenly I'll go, oh, I like that. Well, I should throw that in.
Yeah.
And it can cause me some angst, but and I don't write anything down. There's never pen on paper. There might be something on a whiteboard. I don't. If ideas come to me, I don't tend to even write them down. I tend to just hope that I'll remember them, and I have a method behind that because I think the good ideas then will survive.
Yeah,
and the crap ones won't. That's what I hope.
Survival of the fittest. Yeah, I think there is something to be said about that. I wrote a blog post some time ago about editing, and I said how it can be quite Darwinistic. They have to survive. The best ones have to survive. We see, I'm completely the opposite, and I don't know whether this would cause you anxiety or not, because it apparently does some people. I write completely out of sequence.
Oh no!
Now, I have a good idea what the prologue's going to be, and I might know who's might have an idea in my head for what the final scene's going to be, but the rest of it I write as it comes, and I bounce forward and backwards, and I have all of these different sections, which I'm now getting good at numbering, and around about 100,000 word mark, we're like, right, okay, now this has to go in order. So I sort of move it around and put it in order, and then I have to go through and start thinking, hang on a second, that needs to be changed around, because you can't really do the forensics on that until they've actually found it. So I have to do all that sort of stuff. And only then does the novel start to take shape. And the problem is that every time you do it, you're thinking this will be the time it doesn't work. This will be the time I've done 60,000 words, and I think, do you know what? Bin it, because people do chuck stuff. Touch wood. One of the advantages of having written for quite a lot of books is you then start to say, well, look, it has worked 11 or 12 now, because book 8's out with the beta readers. It has worked 12 times previously. Have confidence. It will work.
You know what? I had a conversation online very briefly with Val McDermott about this, and along the lines of she basically said, after all her books, it's no easier. You have the same neuroses about the fact that this will be the book that you mess up. And that you'll have to count
where they discover that you're actually an imposter, and you've been blagging it. Yeah.
But when you hear, and I listened, Mark Billingham said something the same. After 20 books, he still gets the same panic attacks and oh God, I've messed it up, and this isn't going to work. But there's, you know what? And people now will say to me, I'm stuck, and I say, just don't be stuck. Just write something. Write, even if it's crap. Just write. Get through. You've got to bust through the wall.
Yeah.
You can't.
It doesn't matter if you delete it all the other end. If it's got you going again, it doesn't. It's done its job. Yeah.
Just smash through it. Keep writing, because you can make stuff better, but if it's not there, you can't do anything. I mean,
and you can write stuff as well that doesn't even end up in a book. I literally wrote a 2,000 word chapter the other day, knowing full well that maybe a paragraph would make it in. And the reason was it was an interview scene. I didn't know how the interview scene was going to go. And I had basically a list of about 4 things that needed to come out in the interview, and I decided whether he was going to be cooperative or whether he was just going to no comment all the way through. And what I did was I wrote those 2,000 words, and they were pretty good. I mean, they were good. I would have been perfectly satisfied to put them in a finished book, but I didn't have the space for it. And really, all I needed was a paragraph, because someone was going to tell Warren what happened in that interview in summary. So I wrote the 2,000 words. I found different things happening I wasn't expecting, so I went and tweaked other stuff. And then it was like, right, fine, done that. Okay, right, now let's get that down. And this has to happen, bang, 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 nice tight paragraph. And there's no way I could have written that paragraph if I had not written that chapter first and then distilled it. I couldn't have written that paragraph from scratch.
Well, I deleted from Dead Man's Grave. I wrote a whole scene set in 1830.
Nice.
which was going to be what started this feud off. I was really pleased with it. I think it was a great chapter. My editor looked at it and he said, the problem we have here is it has to be at the beginning. If people go onto like the Kindle and let's have a look at it, let's try before you buy, they'll go historical thriller. I don't want to read that.
Yeah, you got to tell them what the genre is at the end of the day. You don't want to hoodwink someone, because someone might buy that as a historical thriller and then realize it's not.
Exactly.
And you get equally miffed.
Hard with the story, even though I'm really pleased with it. And so I then said to my editor, well, can't I just use it somehow then? It doesn't go in the book. And he goes, short story?
Yeah.
So I've knocked it into a short story, and we'll see what happens to that. So there's nothing wasted. No. There is never anything wasted. Even if you delete 20,000 words, don't ever can them. Put them somewhere that you can find again.
Cut and paste them in a new document, and even then, it just feels less painful, doesn't it? Even if you do never use them, it doesn't matter, because one day you might, and that just feels. Yes, it can make what can be a sometimes rather depressing thing a lot more relaxed. Do you know what? We are pushing our luck a bit, Neil. It's on 8. I think we're probably going to have to knock on the head soon. So apologies to anybody who's not had a chance to get their question answered. I think we did go through a few, but I've had a really good fun. I've really
great chat.
Yeah, and PlusNet haven't let me down. Which is nice.
And neither have Cromarty Firth Wireless.
Excellent. Right. Anyway, big thanks for Ukraine Crime Book Club for hosting us. Sam in particular for helping organise everything and sitting in the background doing the tech. And a big thanks to everyone who came along in what might be a pleasant evening, but sat here and watched us. So terrific to talk to you, Neil.
And to you.
See you, folks.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.